Okay, on step number 6, we are going to be making the top of our table. And you'll notice on your estimating sheet, your cut list, if you look at the dimensions for your top, it says it's going to be 12 inches wide and 18 inches long. And for a board 12 inches wide, you're very rarely going to find one of those in the wood storage room that's that big. And so you're going to have to glue together some pieces for your top. And if you look really closely here, you can see that this top was actually 3 different boards glued together. Actually, this one was 4. It had another small one right there. And so looking from afar, it looks like it's just one board when it's all glued together, or it blends pretty well. And so we're going to have to just glue together some boards to get it to be this size. And when you glue boards together for any project, you want to make sure you always cut them extra big. So we're not going to cut our boards exactly 18 inches long, even though the top's supposed to be 18. We're going to make them a little bit bigger. So after we glue them together, we can trim them. Same thing, we're not going to plane any thickness down until after it's glued together and some other things. So we're going to go back to that wood storage room, find a board that we can use to make a top for our table. Okay, when you come back to the wood storage room and you're looking for boards here for your top, again, understand we need to make sure we glue things together that can equal up to at least the size of our top dimensions. So if I'm looking at this board here, it is a little over 4 inches wide. It's about 4 1/4 or so. And so I need to get at least 12 inches wide. So I'd have to get 3 pieces cut from this to be able to glue together to make that. I've got some other boards back here that are a little more wide. This one here is almost 6 inches, about 5 7/8. Now, just 2 of those is not going to be enough. That's going to be a little bit shy of 12 inches. So I would have to get 3 of these. And that's okay if you end up having something a lot bigger. And so the other thing to be aware of for this is your top. This is what people are going to see mostly. And so be a little more picky on what you choose. Some of these boards have some scuff marks and other things. Now, knots are okay and some scuffs are okay because the planer's going to get rid of that. But if it has major cracks or other things like that, again, be picky on which board you're choosing for your top here. Okay, so I found a board that's just about 5 inches wide, so I know in order to get 12 inches I need to get 3 lengths of this. Remember, we want to cut off any bad ends, if there's any roughness or cracks or other things like that, so we can trim those off on the upcut saw. Just a little bit past where the blade's going to cut, that little line where the blade's coming out of, line that up, we'll make our cut. Now on your cut list it says the top needs to be 18 inches. Well, we want to make sure we go bigger than that because we have to glue boards together, so I'm going to go 20 inches long. That's what I'm typing in here. So again, on your instruction paper it asks you to cut however many lengths you need, 20 inches long, so that we can make our top from that. So just be gentle as you push it up against that little stop, and we'll go ahead and cut 3 lengths 20 inches long. There's one. We'll just move this board out of the way, slide our big board down to the stop again. I'm going to cut 2 more lengths. Nice and tight on that fence. Okay, as soon as we have those 3 boards cut, if you notice, if we put these edge to edge, we should have anything more than 12 inches is great. So we're going to be trimming it and cleaning it up later. Don't worry about there's a little bit of gaps so far or some scuff marks because we're going to clean all that up. So the next step is go to the jointer and joint every edge of every board. So you're actually going to joint both edges of every single board to make every edge nice and flat on the jointer. So when we put these together, there won't be any of these cracks or gaps on here. So we'll head to the jointer. Again, we're going to run both edges till they're nice and flat. We're taller than the fence, so I'm okay just with my hands, but just watch your fingers. Run it as many times as it takes to flatten it out, and again we want to get both edges After you've jointed both edges of every single board, you're going to figure out the placement of these. And you want to look at your boards and say, what is the best looking options? So like this, or maybe I want this board over here in the middle, or which face, you know, look at both faces and say maybe I like that face the best, or whatever. So play around with whatever options you think looks the best. And some things to consider. First off, the looks does matter, so whatever you just personally feel looks the best, go with that. That's our number one. If they both look pretty good and you're like, I like either face, it doesn't matter, then you also need to consider the grain direction on here. What we're talking about that is not only the end grain where you can see these rings of the tree, but also you have what are called grain cathedrals on the face of the board. And so what we want to be with the grain, first off, you can see when I hold the board like this, the grain looks like a rainbow. If I hold it this way, it looks like a big U on the end grain, those rings of the tree. We don't want all the rings of the tree to face the same direction. So if it was like that, those are U's and those are U's. So I would want to make sure that they're opposite. U, rainbow, if possible. Now again, the most important is whatever you feel looks the best. And so if it ends up being the same, you end up having the same end grain because that's what looks the best, then that's totally fine. The purpose of having that end grain alter up and down is to help make sure your boards stay nice and flat when these things get moisture and other things and they tend to move. It'll help just keep it flat. Now here in Utah we're very, very dry, so it's not as big of a deal. The grain cathedrals, what we're talking about, are these little lines on the board, and they kind of go one way. So these are kind of pointing this direction. If I had my board facing this way, they'd be pointing that way. So we want to make sure that all your boards, the grain cathedrals, face the same direction. So it's all listed on your green paper here, talking about the end grain alternating and also your grain cathedrals. So I'm just going to look at this and say, what do I think looks the best? We're considering maybe knots or other parts of our board. Now I wouldn't be too worried about scuff marks because that'll go away when we plane it. Plus you have to consider that we only need 12 inches and this right now is about 15, so I'm going to have some of this trimmed off. So honestly, how I have that looks pretty good. I'm looking at my grain pattern. That's a U, that's a rainbow, and that's a rainbow. So maybe I want to flip that over and say, do I like that face to make it U, rainbow, U? Well, it's got some knots here, and honestly, I don't mind those knots, so I'm probably okay with that, but if it really bothered me, I could have it flipped like that, and it's not a big deal. Actually, honestly, I think I like this because there's not a ton of knots here. If I flipped it over, you see all those knots, but just play around with whatever options you want to organize your board in. And then once you've got it figured out, you're going to want to draw a big triangle on here so that if you do mix it up, whichever face is up and everything like that, and you go to glue this together, you're like, well, how did I have this? I can't remember. Well, you just put your big triangle back together, and now we know exactly how we had it ready to go. So we're ready to glue this together and make our top. Okay, when you're ready to glue your boards together, I would highly recommend use our glue table here. And a couple of reasons why. One, it can help hold the clamps for you. It's got these little slots just to help keep things from tipping over and just kind of keeping it all here. Plus it also has some scrap cardboard down that any glue drips, it's not going to get anywhere where we don't want it. So please use the glue table here when you're gluing. If there's no room, because a lot of students are already using it, and you want to use the bench tops to glue, that's fine, but absolutely make sure you get some of this butcher paper that we've got on the side over here, rip off a piece and have some paper down on the bench top, because I don't want any glue on my benches. When you're gluing these together, you're going to need 3 of these bar clamps, and I would highly recommend use the steel bar clamps. Don't use the little plastic quick grip ones. You want to use these heavy duty metal ones. And we drew our triangle on our boards So we should be able to just put our boards back in order how it should go pretty quick just by looking at our triangle that we drew. You want to make sure that your clamps are spread out enough that we're getting some good pressure near the ends. And when we go to glue this also, we need to make sure we alternate underneath, and then the next clamp is going to be on top and then underneath when we go to glue this together. You have to make sure that they go top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, just in order to get the pressure nice and flat. If you have all of your clamps on the bottom underneath, it's going to put some pressure that makes your boards maybe bow a little bit, not stay flat. So we want to go alternate on those. We make sure we just get the glue on the edges that are going to be connected. So obviously no glue on the outside edges, but we want to put on the inside edges. So I usually just tip them up. Again, this is another reason why using the clamp table is nice. This one I want to tip up this way because the glue's on this side. And just get a nice steady bead of glue. You don't need to do so much glue that it's going to be squeezing out everywhere. We'll get our glue on those. And definitely spread that glue so it covers the entire edge of the board. You don't want any dry spot when you're gluing these together. Just enough that it covers the edge, and then we'll tip that board down. Middle one here, spread that glue around. Want to make that glue cover the entire edge of the board. This one I'm just looking at, it goes like this, but I do need to get that edge still, so I'm going to quickly get some glue put on that edge. And again, you want to work fairly quick. You have about 5 minutes before the glue starts to set a little bit. Obviously it's going to take at least 30 minutes to dry in the clamps, but you do have to get moving once that glue touches your board to get going. Spreading that so it covers the whole edge, and again, only the edges that are going to be touching. So as we put these together here. While it's still wet, again, you can do some shifting. We are extra long on this, and so it's not crucial that it's perfectly lined up. We want it pretty close. And then we're going to slide our clamps in place. Again, this one goes on top. And when you're clamping these together, we want to start on one side and work our way over to the other side. Don't just start clamping them all up tight because things shift and move on you. So we want to start with one side, and I kind of adjust it. I'm lifting up, making sure it's nice and flush on the top as I'm getting a little bit of pressure. Not a lot yet, just a little bit, because they're starting to shift on me. And I can just lift up this board, get it even, making sure where they come together is nice and clean. A little bit of pressure. Now we can move over to the next clamp. And I'm looking at my boards, and I notice that my middle board is sticking up just a little bit, so I'm going to lift this side up until that middle one's nice and even. That looks pretty good. So while I'm holding that, I'm going to get a little bit of pressure on this, making sure those stay even. Now we can move over to our last clamp here, and again, if you need to shift anything, you can. We're pretty good. I'm going to just tighten up a little bit, and you can see some glue squeezing out on all the joints. Once you've got a little bit of pressure, and we're nice and even, really crank down on this. You want this sucker to be super tight, nice and so tight that there's no gaps anymore, all that glue squeezing out, so that when this dries, when we clean this all off, it looks like it's just one board as we're doing this. So again, get your name on it. I can't stress that enough. So get your name on it. We want to have what time we're taking the clamps off, so 30 minutes from right now. I'm going to write that time. Looking at the clock here, right now it's about 2:50, so I'm going to write 3:20 on my board there, so I know not to take these clamps off for at least half an hour. You can leave it on longer. And then also your shelf number. Let's make sure your shelf number gets written on here. We'll wipe up any wet glue with a wet paper towel. Okay, so once you have it all in the clamps and nice and tight, again, take a wet paper towel and wipe off all the glue. And then also, this whole thing, can lift out of the whole clamp rack and set aside somewhere so someone else can use this area. So don't leave your boards in the glue table. Put them against a wall, somewhere on the side, somewhere out of the way, and let those dry out over there. Once you've got it in the clamps, you can get my signature on it. Remember, be picky on the boards that you choose, because whatever you choose, you're stuck with.